to compare these teachings because they're different. And they're both using scripture, and they're both, compelling in some ways and have good points in some ways. And so going back to this gentleman, Tom Bradford. Okay, let's go back to where he's at here. Back to chapter 7.
All right.
We have to cover this thoroughly because there are so many opinions that I want to make sure that I'm trying to rightfully cover the opinions as best as I can, and I'm coming to my own summations in areas. Other areas I'm still seeking God and questioning about this. Just really trying to take an honest look at this. So, all right. So this gentleman, he talks about verse 1 where it says, these angels are standing at the four corners of the earth, and they are holding back the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Well, he brings up the fact that some people, again, see it symbolically, and that may be true of post-trib teachers or others that see this all symbolically, because they look at the word ruah in the Hebrew, which means wind, and it means spirit.
Spirit, yeah.
So they say that, well, it could be four spirits blowing on the earth.
Right.
But he said...
Like the horses could be referencing spirit.
He disagrees with that because he says, basically, and this is what I say, context is so important. The context of this is it's saying... it's calling them four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow. What does wind do? It blows on the earth, the trees, or the sea. And
it talks about the effect of wind, which is to make leaves rustle.
Yeah, and so it's simply...
to make the sea
in his
choppy.
opinion and in mine as well, it means what it says.
Literally, yeah. I take it as...
stopping the winds from blowing. We have this saying, the angel that comes in later saying, wait, don't do this until, the 144,000 are sealed. And if you think about wind, when wind is still as can be, stagnant wind, think about the effects that has on the ocean. I mean, if you're a sailboat on the ocean, you're going to just be floating around all over from pillar to post because there's no wind. You're going to have the heat of the sun, and it may be in colder areas with no wind and no weather. It might be even colder because it's just going to be this cold, frigid, So there all kinds of things could possibly happen in this. With the winds being held back, it can cause a multitude of problems. Okay, should the 144,000 be taken symbolically or literally? According to Bradford, majority of opinion is that the 144,000 are symbolic and that the multitude represents the sealed as believers, according to the majority opinion. In other words, he's talking about worldwide, not just in America, because we have, a lot of pre-trib, views in America where they see it as literal, And so what does it mean? First he says, what does it mean? He looks at this question. Well, what does it mean to be sealed? And he's the one that says there's many views on this. And then we looked at Ezekiel 9 where it talked about the sealing, and described that in part 1. So that's really important to see that. I'm just going to take a quick look at that one more time and read it real quick for the sake of this recording. Ezekiel, we're going to go 9. And I'm going to go to verse 3. Now the glory of God of Israel had gone up from the cherub where it had been to the threshold of the temple, and he called to the man clothed with linen, who had the writer's inkhorn at his side. And the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. And to the others he said, in my hearing, go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eye spare, nor have any pity. And it goes on. So basically... that's another area where we see a sealing that's happening, where those who have the mark are protected, and the rest, and the ones who have the mark are those who are not going after idolatry and other idols. The ones who are killed are the ones who are being judged, basically. He cites that as a reference. And those who refused to participate in the idolatry of those around them were sealed with the mark, and God protected them in the slaughter. As to the 144,000, the number is a very specific number, 12,000 from each tribe. Now, there should be no reason to allegorize this number, as it is very specific. It means what it says. So Revelation 14:1, the same group of people in 14:1, as we see in Revelation 7, the 144,000 are owned by the Lamb and the Father. Each tribe is listed by name, and that's clear. He cited this gentleman who has got another viewpoint. His name's G.K. Bill, and he states this: the community of the redeemed in Revelation 7:3-8 is the same as Revelation 14:1-4 because of the verbal parallels. 144,000 men having been purchased, the first fruits to God, whom Christ redeemed throughout the world. If this indication is correct, then the 144,000 must represent the same redeemed remnant from all over the earth. So the number of the 144,000 is a picture of the church in its entirety. So this is this gentleman's view, not Tom Bradford's, but this other G.K. Bill. Okay. According to Tom Bradford, this means, in other words, Bill concludes that the 144,000 in chapter 14:4 are the first fruits to God. Therefore, they cannot be talking about Israel, so it must be the church. What he is saying here is that Gentile Christians are the first fruits, 144,000, and that the thousands of Christians going back to Pentecost are not. So there is an error in that thinking, because the first fruits were Jews. They were not Gentile people. So there is an error in that thinking, and this is where you get the theology, the replacement theology, comes into this line of thinking. You know, they're forgetting that the first fruits were actually the Jews themselves. You know, the apostles, and then they went to the Jew first, then the Gentile, and so on. So this G.K. Bill, who writes this theological viewpoint, this is a pretty big error to make in regarding the Jews and you know, replacing them with the church. We have to be very careful about that. But if somebody doesn't stop and think about the first fruits and who the first fruits actually are, they could get caught up into that theology real easy. And then also it leads to anti-Semitism, which is horrible. You know? So that theology is dangerous.
It is and that's what a lot of...
When you actually look at it, that replacement theology is saying, you know, the Jews are done away with. No, they're not. And...
and even to say, I mean, the idea that the Jews, you know, killed Jesus. What about the Roman emperor? What about the Romans' role, the Roman protector? What about, you know...
They all took place.
They were a part of it, too.
They were all a part of it. And it was the Roman soldiers who actually nailed him to the cross. So, I mean, we all played a part in it. We all played a part in it.
We cannot say that the Jews killed Jesus.
No, we cannot. We cannot.
Because that is clearly an error.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So yet in Revelation 7:3-8, Bill ignores this other gentleman who believes in this replacement idea. He ignores the fact that 144,000 is specifically identified as Israel, as the children of Israel. In chapter 7, verse 4, I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. That's pretty specific. They are, is specifically identified as Israel Jews, and even names the tribes that they come from. Many today ascribe to this opinion of, you know, the replacement theology, and it is a distortion of Scripture. This type of doctrine is heretical that denies Israel her place in God's overall plan. Tom Bradford's point of view is that because Scripture in the Old Testament, in the patterns of Old Testament Scripture, shows that there have been modifications of the tribe in the past, why can't there be in Revelation 7 and we just take it literally? So now we have Dan and Ephraim are no longer included in Revelation 7, but Manasseh and Joseph are now reinstated or included And so is Levi, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of talked about that. The interesting thing about Levi, I think about Levi, they were priests. They were doing priestly duties and they were separate from the tribes. They had their own sort of headquarters and everything else. And so...
And they didn't work like traditional people work. They
right.
were given a portion.
And so now we have this priestly line brought back into as being a tribe in Revelation 7.
Yeah.
And Joseph is there. And many teachers think that Ephraim is covered under Joseph because it's Joseph's son. But Manasseh is listed. So
yeah. Well, there was that reverse blessing thing with Ephraim and Manasseh as well.
Right, there was.
And Joseph was like, you got your hands mixed up, but it was intentional.
It was intentional, exactly.
And so I don't remember who got the blessing, if Manasseh got it.
So actually, I wanted to go back and actually take a look at those because I read through the blessings, and I just want to finish up with where I'm at with this particular study that I was listening to because it's so interesting. And like I was saying with Levi, when the temple was destroyed after Jesus was crucified, the priesthood stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you have, fast forward a couple thousand years later, and we're getting to the end times, and now we have in Revelation the tribe of Levi being reinstated, which is interesting. You know, they're wanting to build the temple in Jerusalem, all these interesting things with that. So I'm not sure how to tie that all in at this point. I'm still looking into this and studying that. Now, in terms of the pause, the parentheses that pre-trib says, you know, and where the chapter's at, again, looking at the patterns, Bradford cites, as in the days of Noah, there is another interlude in the days of Noah that takes place where Noah is being given instruction and he's preparing, building the ark and so forth. And it's instruction to secure God's people before the catastrophe begins. And so there's just some interesting parallels that he draws with that. Let's look at Genesis 49 a minute here. Okay. Yes, that's what I have marked here. Let's actually, I'm going to back up to this is what I did before because it was what you're referring to. So Genesis 48 verse 17, we're starting there. Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, so he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is your firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also has become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day. Now, see, there's something that I find really interesting about that.
Yeah.
So my thought is because Ephraim is the younger brother, he's not listed in the 12,000, right? But he says he's not listed in the 144,000. So it says, but truly your younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude
of nations.
What did we see after the 12?
Yeah. And a multitude
every tribe,
of
every
nations.
tongue, every nation.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I know.
About that. So then it says, so he blessed them that day, saying, by you, Israel, I will bless, saying, may God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. That's really interesting. He's saying that to Joseph. Moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers. So Joseph has this portion above his brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. And Jacob called his sons and said, gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. In the last days. This is in Genesis 48.
Mm-hmm. I know. That's what's so cool about this book.
Isn't that incredible?
It's incredible.
So then he says, gather together and hear you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. So he's referring to himself simultaneously. Mm-hmm. Jacob and Israel is the same man, remember. Okay, so the first son, Reuben, you are my firstborn. By might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed and defiled it. He went up to my couch. So there's some interesting things he says of Reuben there. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Now this is interesting because this doesn't really say
Simeon
blessing.
isn't listed in the tribes.
He says that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. This may be different than the blessing in the other chapter you stated. Let's take a look at this, and then we'll compare it with the other chapter in Deuteronomy.
Okay.
Then he says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So this is talking about Simeon and Levi.
Are they the ones that murdered all the men, their sisters?
Yes, I believe that was them. Yeah. So then it says of Judah, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Okay. Think of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Jesus comes from, So, okay. Judah, you are he of whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? And now here we have a prophetic statement. The scepter, symbol of kingship, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. So we have this ruler, symbolic of a king, and a lawgiver until Shiloh comes, capital SH, until Shiloh comes. And to him, Shiloh, it's referring to, shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. That's really interesting. That's really a description of Christ in just an interesting way.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we have Zebulun. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. Dan shall judge his people. Okay, now here we have Dan. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent. Here we have, this is the reference there. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that its rider shall fall backward. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. Isn't that an interesting statement with Dan? Gad, a troop shall tramp on him, but he shall triumph at last. Now remember, these descriptions are that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days.
Right.
So he's talking about last days types of things here. And I'm looking at that description of Jesus again. He is described in this as a king, kingship, the scepter will not depart from him, nor lawgiver. You have this both kingship and lawgiver until Shiloh comes. So Christ is until he comes. He came twice, okay? Or he's coming. He came once before. He's coming again. The first time he came, he didn't have the obedience of the people. So he goes on to describe this last day Jesus, and to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. I'm thinking about when he comes back, it talks about the blood up to the horses' bridles and so forth like that. He washed his garments in the wine, and his clothes were dipped in the blood of grapes, his eyes darker than wine, his teeth white, and so there's this description that almost is like the second coming Savior. Continuing with Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he will triumph at last. Bread from Asher shall be rich. he shall yield royal dainties. So in the last days, you have this tribe Asher. It sounds like doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a well. So Joseph is listed here.
Mm-hmm.
His branches run over the wall. So he's a fruitful bow. He's got Ephraim and Manasseh. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, capital S, the stone, capital S, of Israel. By the God of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors. We know that Jesus came through the line of Joseph. There was a couple lines actually that were through there, but yeah. Judah is the other, yes. So it says, up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills, they shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. That's interesting in terms of last days. When you talk about, I've often heard this generation called the Benjamin generation with the kids, just the description there I don't know, that's an interesting description. But anyway, it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them, and he blessed each according to his own blessing. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my father. And then he talks about being buried there, and so on. So, and then the other area was Deuteronomy 33. Okay. Now with this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. So this is Moses' blessing. Start with, for Moses commanded a law for us, a heritage of the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. Let Reuben live and not die, nor let his men be few. And this he said of Judah, hear, Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and may you be a help against his enemies. And of Levi he said, let your Thummim and your Urim be with your Holy One, whom you tested at Massah, and with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah, who says of his father and mother, I have not seen them, nor did he acknowledge his brothers, or know his own children, for they have observed your word and kept your covenant. They shall teach Jacob your judgments, and Israel your law. They shall put incense before you, and a whole burnt sacrifice on your altar. Bless his substance, Lord, and accept the work of his hands. Strike the loins of those who rise against him and of those who hate him, that they rise not again. There's some interesting statements made there. Okay, of Benjamin, he said, the beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety by him, who shelters him all the day long, and he shall dwell between his shoulders. And of Joseph, he said, blessed of the Lord is his land, with the precious things of heaven, with the dew and the deep lying beneath, with the precious fruits of the sun, with the precious produce of the month, with the best things of the ancient mountains, with the precious things of the everlasting hills, with the precious things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him, capital H, who dwelt in the bush, meaning Mount Sinai, in the bush, the burning bush. Let the blessing come on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. His glory is like a firstborn bull, even though Joseph was the youngest. His glory is like like a firstborn bull, and his horns like the horns of a wild ox. Together with them, he shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, peoples of the earth. Remember what I said about Ephraim, the missing, the nations and They are the 10,000s of Ephraim. They are the thousands of Manasseh. That was interesting. Joseph, that was an interesting blessing over him, or comments about him. And of Zebulun, he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call the peoples to the mountains. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall partake of the abundance of the seas, and the treasures hidden in the sand. And of Gad he said, blessed is he who enlarges Gad. He dwells as a lion and tears the arm and the crown of his head. He provided the first part for himself, because a lawgiver's portion was reserved there. He came with the heads of the people and administered the justice of the Lord and his judgments with Israel. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. That's all he said about Dan. Remember all this stuff. He's a serpent. It's like the Lord was upset with Dan. Okay. And of Naphtali, he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full of the blessing of the Lord, possess the west and the south. And of Asher, he said, Asher is most blessed of sons. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. Your sandals shall be iron and bronze. As your days, so shall your strength be. There is no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides the heavens to help you, and in his excellence on the clouds. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will thrust out the enemy from before you, and will say, destroy. Then Israel shall dwell in safety, the fountain of Jacob alone, in the land of grain and new wine. His heavens shall also drop dew. Happy are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord, the shield of your help and the sword of your majesty. Your enemies shall submit to you, and you shall tread down their high places. So, interesting commentating on those tribes in the early days there, and speaking to the brothers and their,
the individuals and then the tribes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we went a long way today. It's almost 3:00.
Yeah, that was a lot. We covered a lot.
We covered a ton, but we got to keep moving. So we're going to have to move into the seventh seal. But I wanted to really, this has been so controversial out there. Yes. Who are these people? Who do they represent? Who are they? And it's important when determining doctrine.